Friends, welcome to the WILDSONS podcast. This is Pablo, and today I'll be sharing with you the second part of my conversation with Jay Heck, founder and director of WILDSONS, and a great friend with whom I have walked many, many miles. If you haven't watched the first part of our conversation, I suggest you start there. But today, on this second part, we dive into this big topic of raising our sons to become real men, how to give them a vision of what a strong and healthy man looks like, what true masculinity looks like, what a real man is, and then on how to guide them, our boys, through the different stages of the masculine journey, from the moment they are young boys through the path of walking with God to become all that He created them to be. I hope you enjoy it. Jay, welcome back to the WILDSONS podcast. So cool to have you join me again and see your smile and chat with you again. How you doing today?
I'm good, man. Sitting here with one of my favorite people. I'm in good shape.
Awesome. Well, last episode we talked. Initially, we set out with the intention of talking about how do we raise sons to become real men. But in order to give context to that conversation, we had to dive deeper first into how do we become true sons of God ourselves first. And so we're super grateful. I speak for myself and for the WILDSONS community. Thank you for sharing your journey and opening up vulnerably and sharing of your story with church and your story of family and then encountering God in such a profound way, learning that you could walk with Him as a son, which was a new category, not theologically, but at the level of the heart, and how that revolutionized your life as it did mine. Yeah, I would love to start maybe then shifting gears a bit. The journey of for a boy to become a man, is not simply about age, it's not simply about growing up biologically. And this is something that sadly we see in culture today. We see a society where it's mostly little boys in men's bodies leading organizations and companies and churches and in politics and arts and education and every facet of life. And as a result, they're bringing so much damage. But as fathers, as men first, who want to follow God and who want to become all that God created us to be first. But then as men who want to raise our own sons so that they become the men God created them to be, and that they can walk with strength and with confidence, knowing who they are and bringing their strength sacrificially on behalf of others. How in the world do we do that? That's one of the most common questions we get from men at our events, at our workshops. This is amazing and I see it from me, but how do I raise my sons, whether they're 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, or 9, 10, 13, 15, 18 years old? How do I join God in this spectacular journey of initiating them into becoming all that God created them to be? So the space is open, the table is set. What comes to mind as I bring this big topic before you?
I think I'll start off by saying it is to the benefit of a man to feel hungry, thirsty, and in pain with regards to this question that you just posed. It is clearly one of the most important questions that any man in all of human history and any civilization can ask. How do I prepare my son to be my age? In fact, how can I do him a solid and prepare him better than I was prepared? And there's tips, there's techniques. We can learn a lot from other people. I think part of a huge breakthrough to begin with is just to understand and acknowledge, okay, this is important, and I don't know what I'm doing, so I need help. The moment you, that's a revelation.
yeah, that alone makes me like, relax my shoulders,
Yeah.
because I think that the unspoken assumption is crap. I should know these things, and I should get my
Mhm.
act together. And he's like reacting in this way, or I see that his heart is longing for this, or I'm too preoccupied even with work and other things, that how in the world am I going to do this? And the perception that everyone else has their act together, but I'm the only one blowing it. And
Mhm.
so I just want to pause there, because I think that you're starting not where I thought you would, but where you needed to start, which is grace. If you're asking that question, it means that your heart is in a good place, number one, and number two, it's all right to not know.
Mhm. Absolutely. In the retreats, which I call first tracks, these are father and son retreats where the sons are between the ages of 9 and 13 years old.
Hmm.
I can look across that room, and you've been there, with your son Mateo, and it was glorious. And to be able to look across the room where I didn't recruit anybody, I didn't go to church groups, I didn't go to any organized, convenient pool of men to draw from. And
Hmm.
I purposely do that. And why that has been so valuable to me is every single man who's sitting in that room, God has already filtered through that mm, through that ache that you just described.
Hmm.
No man shows up. No man dares take the risk of paying the money, either driving a long distance or flying a long distance, as many fathers and sons or fathers and daughters do. Walking across that field, not knowing anybody, if they're not already hungry, thirsty, or in pain. And I mean, we know from the Beatitudes that Jesus says, blessed are you when you are scared out of your mind and you are willing to drop to your knees and say what I have learned to be the most important three words in my fathering journey and in my sonship journey. And it's these three words. And if you've got a piece of paper and you've got a pen, I want you to write these three down. It's Father, father me,
Hmm.
period.
Yeah.
That is the posture that humanity was meant to embrace in the Garden of Eden. And we would still have a paradise today if we knew that we had the freedom to go to a father who knows already how to do the things that we are created to do, and that he will be patient, he'll be kind, and he'll be loving. It's our preconceived notions about him and about how he might view us that actually get in the way of us boldly going to him and asking that question, Father, father me. If I could, I'd love to pull some guys in by just sharing a piece of my story where I went from not knowing that to knowing that.
Hmm.
You okay with that?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. So I was at a retreat in the mountains in Colorado, which I discussed. We talked about that in our the first part of this conversation.
Hmm.
2008. That's when the category was presented to me by God. You've never felt or known what it means to be the beloved son.
Hmm.
And he brought that up as a category for me because I was just filled with anger and I was trying to get other men to love me. And when they didn't know that's what I was desperate for, it it kind of incited me internally, and God brought it all to the surface in the very poetic, beautiful, kind but disruptive way. So he brought all that emotion to the surface so that he could tell me that all those were symptoms of not feeling like I had this super present, super loving, super accessible, super available Father in heaven. And so I began, on that very day, through tears. My question to him was, well, what does it look like to be a beloved son? And that was my quest, for the rest of my life. I knew that this is one of the most important questions that I can ask. Scripture's got to reveal it. The life of Jesus has to reveal it. All the stories of men in Scripture have to reveal it. The men around me who've been walking with God, I know that I have stuff to glean from all of them. And so for the next well, I would just say for the next 6 years, as best I could, I plodded along, learning and asking the question, what does it mean to be a son? That's when casual adventure began to be a category for me. I began doing things I would never have given myself permission to do before. It's like spending a little money on myself because God said you're worth it. Spending a little time on myself, which I never would have before because God was saying you're worth it. You're my beloved son. So it was a lot of personal risk taking where I felt like if I make this decision, I'm going to be the beneficiary of it. But now we move 6 years into that journey. Now I've got a 12-year-old son, and I'm beginning to see him, and I'm beginning to recognize there are things that he needs from me because he's in that really awkward transition phase where I'm not sure if he's supposed to be acting older than he is right now. And I'm not sure exactly whether I'm supposed to tell him to act differently or push him. I don't want him to be afraid of me, but I also don't want to fail him by not preparing him in an appropriate way. But what I found was around that age of 10, 11, 12, in my own fear and anxiety, I began pushing my son. My voice got stern. I began to expect that, or I began to believe that it was my job to fast forward the clock in him and help him make the transition into young man. And that is just a pressure that we're not meant as men to bear. That's not our job. So I was confused about this. I did not know the answer to this. Am I supposed to push him into manhood, or am I supposed to just wait for some internal clock, or is there something in his DNA that switches on and then I know to step in at that point? Like something that felt obvious, like he begins to badmouth his mom because he's letting go of her apron strings and he's beginning, to move toward you. I was looking for something that felt really obvious, but I got scared, to be honest with you. And I thought, well, I don't want to burden God with this, so I'm going to start pushing him into manhood quickly. And what happened was he began to not feel safe around me. That's probably the clearest way to place it. He didn't know what he was going to get. He didn't know if he was going to get tender dad or if he was going to get stern dad. He didn't know if I was going to lose patience with him because he's still in that stage at 12 years old where if you ask him to mow the lawn, it's going to take him like 6 hours to mow my lawn, which is like a postage stamp. And you're going to have to go back and say it to him over and over again. And if I'm not patient, and if I don't know where he is, and if I'm not permitting him to be at that very, very young stage, then I become an unsafe person. So all that is to say, I knew that when he was 12, it was my job to begin either pushing him or inviting him. I didn't know what it looked like, by force or by invitation, into some sort of milestone. And so I went to Bear and I said, would you be interested in going to Colorado, just you and me, for 2 weeks? I had got a new 4Runner. It was a 2014 4Runner. I just had, felt like the stars aligned, and we'll do some off-roading, we'll do some mountain biking. And a friend had invited me to go and do a little backpacking with his son.
And all of that, Jay, I'm beginning to picture that in light of how God had been fathering you in the backcountry and in adventure and off-roading and backpacking. I see the Father's heart in you, wanting now to invite your son into doing that together so that he can experience what you had.
Absolutely. And he is drawn naturally to fantasy books. He's a voracious reader. Cybersecurity, He liked the keyboard, and
Mm-hmm.
so his ideas and his frontier at that point was really different than mine. But you're right, I had only recently begun being invited into the frontier of wilderness and the marathon and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's natural that I wanted to invite my son into that type of environment. So he said yes, not with a ton of enthusiasm. We were about 3 weeks out, and then 2 nights before we were going to leave, we had the stockpile of all the camping gear and the tents and the bikes, and everything is either at the front of the garage ready to be loaded, or it's at the front of the living room.
Mm.
And it's nighttime, and Bear is it's tuck-in time. And Heather comes out first because I go in and I would read to the kids at nighttime. And Heather is coming out of the room into a darkened hallway, and she sees me and she stops me and she looks me in the eye and she said, "You just need to listen to him."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh shit, what I most feared, it's happened. I thought I was going to be able to skirt it and avoid it, but I already knew, whether it's the Holy Spirit or whether it was, as Mel Gibson said in The Patriot, I fear that my sins will come back to haunt me. Somehow my fear was that he would be reluctant to go spend time with me.
Mm.
And so I walked in the room, and there's my son basically in a puddle, curled up in the fetal position, and he's crying. And he had told Heather that he did not want to go to Colorado with me. And I lay down on the bed with him, or I sat on the bed and I looked at him, and it took some comforting. The thing was, I'm feeling like he's feeling. Like I know how he's feeling right now.
Yeah.
And I have compassion on him.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't know how to love him. I don't know whether to push him. I don't know whether to say, "Hey, toughen up, little guy. Come on, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
We've already got plans." And so I put my hand on his leg, and I said, "Buddy, I promise, you can trust me. What are you feeling?" And it came out through the tears. "Well, I'm afraid you're going to make me climb up a mountain. I'm afraid you're going to make me do these things that I can't do." He was afraid of comparison with the other boy that was going to be there living in Colorado. This other boy would present something to compare my son to and be disappointed with him in. And the heart of it was, he was afraid of disappointing me because he already felt like a disappointment to me.
Wow.
And I sat in silence as he cried, and I had no idea what to do. I literally had no idea what to do.
Yeah.
And there was a part of me that thought, you've already lost the battle. You've already lost. Just give up. And so I crawled on my knees to the floor, and just like in the penitent prayer position, with my hands clasped together and my head in my hands, the bed was literally right here in this room, which is now my office, but he was sitting right there. And I began to cry. I began to weep. And all my pain, all my fear, all my anxiety that I'd been displacing and discharging into my son came to the surface, and I realized I have no idea what I'm doing. And so those 3 life-changing words came out of me that were a total revelation at the time. Father, father me. You know how to be a good dad. I don't. So since you know, if you're willing, if you're in the business of doing this, I need you to show me how to do what I don't know how to do. And in that moment, he said, I heard him whisper to me, fight. What? Fight? And he said, fight. Now, I had engaged in some spiritual warfare over the previous 6 years. I'd been learning how to do that. But he was, I could tell he was saying, I want you to fight this right here in this room right now. And so it was a new category for Bear. So I said, Bear, I'm feeling like this could be at least in part spiritual. I hear what you're saying, and I understand why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. But can I do what I feel like is be obedient to what I hear the Lord saying to me. Do you mind telling me exactly what you're feeling in a word? And he said, well, I'm afraid. I said, okay, we're going to pray against fear. So I laid my hands on him. We prayed against fear. We bound it. We cast it out. I said, what else are you feeling? And he would go through a list of emotions or descriptions. I'm afraid of disappointing you. I'm afraid of failing. So I was led to name those things in very, very simple prayers, understanding that he's only 12 years old. And I cast those things out. And literally within 5 minutes, he popped up in bed with a smile on his face, wiped the tears away, and he said, actually, I feel a whole lot better. Let's do it.
Wow.
And the thing is, the rest of the trip was that scenario put on repeat over and over again. That trip did happen,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a long fought battle. He got stuff stolen out of his truck, or out of our truck on that trip. All of his, his whoopee, his all of his precious little things that he would go to for comfort, all of them got stolen. So he just really got put in very disruptive places over and over again. And we would find ourselves in the parking lot of a gas station on our knees again, saying, God, we feel like giving up, but what do you have to say? Anyway, by the end of that 2 weeks, my relationship with God was completely different. My relationship with my son was completely different. The conversations that I had with my son were conversations that Jesus only told me to have maybe an hour before I had them. Everything was so fluid. And my son got a clearer picture of his dad, his earthly dad and his heavenly dad, then he probably knew God's heart for him better at that moment than I might have at that moment. Just kind of supernaturally, God accelerated my journey of sonship and my son's journey of sonship. And instead of my son being over here and me being over here in our journeys where I'm way ahead of him, God miraculously somehow brought us so that we were side by side with one another. Different stages, but we were able to take and assume and learn from God in our appropriate stages, but to do it side by side. And I think probably the most anointed thing to come out of my mouth over that 2 weeks, where I felt like I was just always searching, what am I supposed to say? Is I said, son, I'm trying to figure out how to be a son. And I would much rather learn how to do this side by side with you than try and learn apart from you. Would you be willing for both of us to go on a journey and extend grace to one another and share notes and compare our experiences and just learn together? And he said, yes. And that's what we've been doing since that trip in 2014. So it's been a decade now.
Wow.
And it's just made all the difference in the world.
Jay is so hopeful at so many levels, because then to the question of how do I raise my son to become a man, the answer is not an equation, a program, or a list of principles, and this is how the rite of passage is done, and you need to follow it, and then you need to do this, and then you need to do that, and don't forget this other thing. It's rooted, it's condensed in that one phrase. Number one, is that one phrase you were saying is, Father, father me, in fathering my son. Obviously, in everything in life, right? And that's the life of the son.
Yeah.
It is from this point on, from the moment of that revelation of you as the beloved son of the Father 6 years prior, and the journey of learning, I don't need to live out of my own volition. I can live in union with God so that he can father me and initiate me into every aspect of my life. And now 6 years later, you're confronted in this place, in that holy moment, in that very room, with, I cannot do this on my own, and I don't have to. right? And so letting go of the pressure. How do I father my boy well? How do I initiate him well? Do I push him? Do I wait? To not father, would you father me in fathering my son? I can breathe, right?
Mm-hmm.
That as a category,
Mm-hmm.
if that is really possible, can I trust that my Father in heaven, that God, the God of the universe, the God who created me and who created my sons, wants to actively participate in showing me, in guiding me, in teaching me how I can turn to my son and offer him what he needs at every moment? I don't have to have my act together. I don't have to figure it out. My Father can guide me. Spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
Spectacular. Now, through that lens, you touch on a few things, the age of 10, 11, 12, and how you began to see whether, by instinct or because you had learned it already, that the needs that your boy had had up to that point were shifting, and that he
Mm-hmm.
was entering into a new season where he needed different things, and he needed that journey, whatever that passage or passages were going to be, to turn from a boy into a young man and into a grown-up man, strong, who reflects the image of God. How has that been for you? So could you speak and share with me and with our community how you have learned, what is it that the young boy needs, and how can we participate in raising those young boys with our Father God? And then how those needs shift as they go from the young boy to 10, 11, 12, and from that point on, how do you see those shifts? What are their needs, and how do we participate with God, obviously under that big umbrella, not tips and techniques, not programmatically, but in walking in union with God through the lens of that one question: Father, help me father my sons. Father, father me.
Yes. What a huge and beautiful question. Um, well, Stephen Covey, I think it was in the book Good to Great, makes the statement you have to begin with the end in mind. And it stunned me that I thought I was raising a boy, and I had never thought beyond that. But the reality is, God has given me this boy, and this is a man in training. And so just the switch, like, this is a child of God that is destined to bring the kingdom of God. And this is his early stage. What does he need in this stage right now? What does he need here? So King Solomon had the wisdom to say, without a vision, the people cast off restraint. And if you look a little bit more deeply into the Hebrew, without a divine revelation, the people cast off restraint, they die, they perish. Oh,
Hmm.
Pablo, look at our culture.
Yeah.
We have lost a vision of what manhood is.
Mm-hmm.
That alone, if a father were just to say, I'm going to spend the next 12 months painting a clear picture of what authentic manhood looks like, the reality is that vision was for my son, and it is for other sons that I come to see, is so compelling that that's enough for many of them. Richard Rohr, in his book, I think it's called The Return of Adam, Return to Adam, Adam's Return, something like that. I don't know. I read it a long time ago. He said that in essence, that through the rite of passage that's been done throughout the world, the boy actually has to have a clear enough picture of the role in the community he's being invited into, and that by comparison, he has to hate the role of a boy. He has to look at what he's being invited into as one who hunts, or as the wise man, or as the medicine man, somebody who has something of significance and value to bring to the community. If he doesn't see that, he's going to continue playing video games. He's going to continue being a boy.
Yeah.
So there are several things that our sons desperately need a vision for. The first is, what does it look like? What does a real man look like? And you'll notice that there are very few movies that Hollywood's even putting out anymore with real men who go on the hero's journey, where they get to see an innocent boy who's lost his innocence, going through a trial, overcoming. I mean, Luke Skywalker was a huge hero of ours, and the transformation on Han Solo back when I was a kid, and Indiana Jones. And
Yep.
what they have now is they have,
Yeah.
for the most part, comic book characters, who are augmented by technology as if that's going to be their savior. So the movies that are out right now are not sufficient. Like, you have to go back into the library, into the archives. And even if you can't show them an entire movie, what I began to do is look for pictures of authentic manhood. And I would go and I would cue it up and I would say, watch what's happening here in this movie Dunkirk, right here. Watch what happens with this man and this man and this man. And in doing that, and in me celebrating it, my son was able to have like a hook to hang a category on. Oh, men are willing to do hard things. Men take responsibility. And it settles so much more if you can give them a picture that they can celebrate. And I would also tell my wife, whenever you see a real man, stop him, point to that guy, and celebrate authentic masculinity. Say, look at that guy. He's awesome. And my son began to, first and foremost, be excited about what he could become. Sadly, many boys today, nobody's holding up a picture of authentic manhood. And nobody at school is going to do it. Coaches aren't going to do it. I mean, most of our kids are getting their worldview not from home, but from other people. And we have to be super intentional about painting that picture over time with our son. This is what a true man is. Now that's a mouthful right there. So just the picture of authentic manhood without a vision of manhood, your son will perish.
Let's get into the very, very, very practical. You mentioned Dunkirk. What else was helpful for you in your shoes with your son by way of painting that picture? I'm literally picturing myself right now. Crap, what movie am I going to invite them to watch this weekend? And that's true for my 7-year-old, who can watch certain things, and then for my 13-year-old who can watch some other things. Give me examples where you saw, oh, he gets it. He's seeing masculinity properly expressed here.
Yes. Well, I'm going to reflect back to you a little bit, because recently I was with you and Mateo, and he wants to watch Stranger Things. And that is just that's a minefield full of gold and also explosive devices, right? So for you to have the wisdom as a father, we discussed this, like to watch that with him and to pause, even though kids will like, oh, Dad, will you just play the movie? Will you not give me the explanation? Well, Hollywood will create their worldview if you don't help them, right? But the more you pause and say, here's what I want you to see, or what do you see, the more God actually is able to take over and begin their thinking. So I would love to hear how you're doing that with Mateo.
It's spectacular. And let me give you a quick answer on that. Completely disruptive, because the first reaction is, there is no way in the world that I'm watching that show, horror, opening the door for fear and horrible things into my son's life. There are a bunch of kids who are swearing, completely abandoned by their parents, doing whatever the heck they want with their lives, and encountering this horrific world. Pause. And just drawing from your own line, Father, why is it that my son is feeling so drawn to watching this? Is it simply because his friends are talking about it? Is there something for, what do I do in this? And his answer, and then when we had this conversation, you and I here in Colorado, you confirmed it. God confirmed it through you. Oh no, Jesus is in this. And so from your advice, we actually went to Amazon and got this book, which is I forget the name, but it's basically the gospel according to Stranger Things or something like that. But it's the parallel on how Stranger Things actually speaks of a lot of things metaphorically that are drawing from the story of we live in this world that is partially physical, but there is this spiritual reality and there is darkness and we have an enemy and he's real. And how do we participate in this life of the spirit and life in the flesh? And how do we stand our ground against the forces of evil that are spiritual and are attacking us at all times? And so we actually got the book. And I said, all right, we're going to walk through this slowly. And I said, I'm going to watch the episodes first because I want to make sure that I'm not exposing you to anything that you're not ready for. And so I'm watching the video, the show. I'm seeing, oh yeah, there is a reality to this, right? Every good story draws its power from the real story, the story of the gospel. And so we have been reading this book chapter by chapter. And the book begins to actually give away the plot. And so I have to be careful not to kill the show itself. But we watch and we read and we watch and we read. And then we are comparing, what are you seeing in this? And the parallels are there. So now he's speaking about those in his own terms. He's saying, yeah, it's like there is this upside down and there's this world of darkness. But I loved how these kids, even though no one believes in them, they know that there is an evil one and they need to fight it because they need to rescue their friend. And they're not willing to believe that their friend is dead and they're going to die if necessary to sacrifice themselves on behalf of their son. So that was one of the conversations: courage and strength and brotherhood, and all of that is coming from something absolutely crazy that no sane Christian father would show his son. And that's our father, right? Father me, and he's showing me one step at a time where my son is needing it, and we're enjoying it. We're halfway through season 1 right now. And there are some things that I have to fast forward and not show him. But yeah, Jesus is showing up through it. He's seeing courage. He's seeing true masculinity. He's seeing heroic sacrifice. He's seeing a supernatural world that is real. He's seeing an evil one who will not stop at anything until he destroys all that is good and beautiful. So yeah, that's my quick report on the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago.
And you're illustrating something that is super important, is whenever you can enter into their world so that you're having conversations about the environments that they're attracted to, that's just a big win. It's easy in fear and our anxiety to just tell our kids no, and there is an age and there are seasons and there are circumstances where that's totally appropriate. I mean, there's a lot of things that my kid was the last to get to do or watch or experience. But he looks back now and says, he says, thank you, for most of those things. We'll see. I told him I'd pay for counseling in the future. And I was serious with both my kids. It's unavoidable. You're going to hurt your kids, right? You're going to make a lot of mistakes.
And for reference, just to close on this one, is Michael Heiser, and the book is called The World Turned Upside Down, Finding the Gospel in Stranger Things. And again, I'm not recommending the show, but it's been super fun. So we're having a ball watching it.
Yeah, the gospel's all in there. Elle, who's kind of the hero character, she's got these powers, but every time she uses them, she suffers like Christ. So she's kind of this Christ figure, and she's got these disciples around here, and they're all a bunch of misfits like the disciples. And so that's fun. Okay, so whenever you can, try and use the world that they're interested in. If you can enter into the 12-year-old, the 13-year-old, the 14-year-old world and ask them questions. Well, why do you like that? Be curious, lovingly curious, because you want to get into their heart and see things. And lots of times it's great to ask questions and not have any answers at all. You're just asking, what do you see in it, and letting them be an adult who struggles to articulate what they see. And then, of course, it's really helpful, if everybody loves stories. to ask questions like, well, what does this story have in common with that story and that story? And to begin to help them see that there's a common thread through all the stories, that a boy becomes a man,
Mm-hmm.
and the man becomes a hero, and the hero has a role, and that role isn't always easy. In fact, the harder the story, um, the harder the life of the hero, the better the story,
Yeah.
you know. And then, you know, you can make so many references to biblical characters and Christ himself, of course. But I was just always praying, Father, open my eyes to see it. Like, if I have to construct a world that's constantly showing, to try and teach my son how to navigate the world and how to view the world, I don't have enough wisdom. I don't have enough energy to do it. So, what I'm asking, Jesus, is that you give me the eyes in the moment to see what you want me to see. And so, for example, we would be at a mall, and there was a kid that just got arrested. He's in handcuffs, and in a very peaceful way, a cop is, you know, walking this kid through, who's embarrassed, through the mall, to be able to stop and say, buddy, that's a kid who's made bad decisions, but God has an incredible plan for that kid's life. His life is in the balance. There are two forces at work for his heart. It's not about him being bad or good. It's about him being worth something. And there's a battle for his soul. And he made bad decisions. You know, so you're just I would just try and respond everywhere that I could. And I would also try and keep my lessons as short as possible. Or I would ask my son, what do you see? And then he sees it and goes, I just nod and I wink and say, yep, just want to make sure you saw that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's the vision of what a real man like looks like, and also what compromised men look like.
That one is
That's
not,
really important.
and that is very easy. Just
Yeah, it is.
yeah, everywhere.
Yeah, it is. It's everywhere. But then you've got this other vision that they have to have. What does the journey look like? How does one go from being a boy to becoming that man? And why is it that everybody grows up, everybody gets taller, their hair grows out, they get beards, but some of them are able to move gracefully into that hero status where their lives are celebrated by other people instead of a man who by himself celebrates his own life?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how what's the difference? What's the difference in the path that they took? Let's be curious about that. And so it was totally essential. And that first conversation, that was the last night that my son and I were on that Colorado trip, the Lord said, okay, it's time for you, without a bunch of props, I want you to just articulate to your son the stages of the masculine journey, as you and I both know, Pablo, from the book Fathered by God. At the time, the book had a different name, but that was so life-changing to me. It was so helpful, so full of grace to see that these stages of the masculine journey flowed in and out of one another, and to know that what we didn't get in one of the earlier stages, if we dare to ask, God will take us back to the earlier stages, and he will firm up those compromised spaces. You know, he will bring the much needed love and attention and initiation to them. And for me to be able to take a piece of paper and just draw what those stages were, my son was just rapt. I was really surprised that his reaction at the age of 12 to knowing that there was a series of steps to becoming the greatest, strongest, wisest, most powerful kind of man, it was like, I just needed to see it. That was the same reaction I had when I was reading the book. And Pablo, you've been there. for years now, one of the most important conversations I have at First Tracks, which ends up being usually a revelation that I can visually see happening to both the fathers and the sons, is I'll just do a simple rock cairn and I'll go through the stages of the masculine journey. And you can see these kids as young as 9 years old that you wouldn't think would care so much. Their eyes just light up and they go, whoa, that's amazing. And especially if you can take the characters that they know and that they love from the stories and describe the stages of the masculine journey through the stories that they know. It's life-saving to these kids. And so here's the goal. If you can cast a vision for what authentic manhood looks like, and then you can cast a vision for what the series of steps and the stages look like to becoming that, they will begin to look at manhood and they will begin being internally and divinely compelled to seek that out. You will not, the battle is a fraction as a father, as hard as it would be if you were trying to pull or push your son into a vision that they had into an identity that they had no clear vision of, right? So I sit back in amazement over the last 10 years thinking God didn't even need me to say anything, because once he had the vision, God was able to speak directly to his heart and invite him into the next stage. So fathering is way easier if we just lay the groundwork and paint the pictures. So it's almost like, to the degree that you can paint pictures of authentic masculinity and what the journey looks like and put it all over their walls so that they're going to bed and they're waking up with these pictures of authentic masculinity. And I'll pull back and say that you as the father are the most important moving picture of masculinity in their lives. If you can do that, then fathering is way easier.
I almost want to pause there and allow all of the to absorb, to allow every cell in my body to absorb it, both for my own journey, because I am an incomplete man, because I have not been fully restored and initiated as the man God created me to be yet, and then for my sons. I want to ask God to give me a clear revelation of that man that I could become through the movies and the heroes and the stories and the men that we see out there acting heroically. And then a clear revelation of that journey to get there for me, and then to invite my sons into that. Why don't we talk a bit about those stages? What does that journey look like? And again, you and I are drawing from the book Father by God by John Eldridge, highly recommended to everyone for their own journey of initiation and becoming truly the beloved sons and the sons, the man God created us to be. But then as that guide to help us raise our boys and lead them on the path stage by stage as God leads us. But why don't we unpack those, at least a bit of each one of the stages, how they build upon the previous one, to give a clear picture. I have that image of what is the picture of the man that God is guiding me to become, and then what is that path? What is that arc that I am supposed to follow as I walk with him? It starts when we are little, when we are little boys. So would you want to speak to that?
Yeah, you bet. So the first stage is the stage of the beloved son. It's the child who literally has nothing to offer at all. They are the recipient of love and joy, and the child cries when they're uncomfortable or happy or unhappy or hungry, and it's the delight of the parent to sacrifice anything and everything for that child. And what that child receives is through the eye contact with the mother. As it's nursing, it begins to believe and know within its spirit, I'm safe, I'm seen, I'm loved, my needs will be met. I am a bringer of joy. People delight in me. And just pause there if our story continued in that way, and all humanity had received that lesson and was able to cling to that for the rest of their lives, the world that we live in would be completely different.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So many kids don't receive that. But that is meant to be in preparation. We get that settledness within our hearts that I'm safe, I'm loved, I'm seen, I'm protected. The world is a safe place. We begin then to move into the cowboy ranger stage or the adventurer stage. That's one of the reasons that I call our adventure first tracks, because they're taking their very first steps into completely unfamiliar territory. This is where the father and the mother are constructing an environment where the son can challenge himself and push his limits to discover there's more to him than he thought. He's able to be daring. He's able to skin his knee, to skateboard, to crawl up a tree and maybe fall down, build a little something, right? But the father is right there, and the father never lets the kid climb so high in the tree that if he falls, he's really going to hurt himself or get killed or break his neck or anything like that. It's a well-constructed environment, but to that child, it's all adventure. And then after some testing and after some internal strengthening of the soul, well, then you can go into an environment that tests them even more, and that's the warrior stage. And in the warrior stage, you are, in a way, you're having to bring your strength for limited resources. There's only a certain number of people on the team, and if you don't work hard, if you don't bring your A game, then you're going to get cut from the team, cut from the roster. You'll have to sit on the bench. If you don't fight hard in the classroom, well, then you're going to get a C or a D or some score that reflects that, right? So the child is learning, oh, wait a minute, now I really have to bring my strength and continue to discover my strength, and the father's right there beside. There's so much that could be said about the warrior stage. It could also, be in a way reflected on the playground, in the relationships where there's no teachers and there's no parents around, and the kid is learning to defend himself, and he's standing up, hopefully, for the kid that's being abused or overlooked, or some of our worst moments in our stories are on playgrounds. I mean,
Yeah.
It was for me, right?
Yeah. It is always like a prison yard.
Yes. Yeah. So that's part of the warrior. I mean, and that doesn't go away. So we are forever each of those stages. I am still being invited into deeper revelation of every single stage. I still have to fight for the things that I want. I still have to take risks and trust that God's going to be there to catch me. I still have to trust that I'm the beloved son. So those are the first three stages: beloved son, then the adventurer, and then the warrior. And then we come to the lover poet stage. This is the stage where, okay, well, this is funny. My son loved math, and he had zero appreciation for art whatsoever. And he just said, art's stupid. There's nothing to, why would anybody care about art? But then there was a moment a couple years later where all of a sudden his eyes began to be open, and see the beauty in the world around. We would go to Colorado on that trip when he was 12. I could point to a mountain. I could point to snow. I could point to something beautiful right over his head, right past his heart. I mean, it's just...
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I could get frustrated with that. But it's helpful just to know, no, it hasn't hit. My job is simply to be here to respond to it and to celebrate it once God initiates that inside him. It's like a fuse that gets plugged in or a switch that comes on. So I remember just the story. I'm fascinated by the Civil War and Robert E. Lee, General Robert E. Lee. I mean, the whole history of our nation would have been different if Robert E. Lee, who lived in Virginia, had fought for the North. And the president at the time invited him to be the commanding general of the Union Army. And he debated about it and he debated about it, but it was his love for Virginia, which was on the border. He said, I could not fight for anyone other than this nation, this people, and this country that I love. So this is just kind of an example of where we have to love before we can really become warriors. And it's a beautiful little Celtic proverb, never give a sword to a man who can't dance. And to a kid, they don't understand that. But to a loving father who's got a family that they rejoice in, there's nothing that I would more joyfully give my life for than the beauty that takes place around my dinner table, and in my living room. So learning that there is a beauty in the world worth fighting for, that's a lesson that's necessary to move into the next stage, which is the stage of the king, where you're given a kingdom to rule and to reign over. And hopefully we become men who realize that we are not put in the position of king and leadership to serve ourselves, but instead it's to sacrificially serve others. It's not something to be taken lightly. In fact, the best kings are usually the reluctant kings. And that has been a huge lesson, to be able to watch The Lord of the Rings and to watch stories like Gladiator and Cinderella Man, men who are driven by love to do really hard things. And then they end up being celebrated as a really rare kind of man. And to be able to say to our sons, this is your destiny, is to be a man that is a mystery to other men, that calls them up into something higher. So that's the stage of the king. And then it moves into the stage of the sage, which is the king who has had a kingdom, has made a bunch of decisions, failed, succeeded, and has willingly relinquished the position of power, relinquished his throne, to then become the hero behind the hero, to become the Gandalf in the story, to become the Yoda, to become the Obi-Wan Kenobi, who sees and recognizes that there is an upcoming man who needs to take the role for everyone's good of the hero, needs to be the king, but that king needs somebody to walk them through it. And my son needed to see that because there's so few sages. Like, that's probably the most important stage to give our sons visibility to, because everyone wants to be a king, but they don't know what it costs them. And very few become sages. So that's probably the most important stage that I would celebrate when I would show my son. So John's stages go through them. So I'll go through them again. Beloved son, the adventurer, the warrior, the lover poet, the king, the sage, and that's 6 stages. And frankly, I'm bothered by that. So that's as far as John's book goes. But I was like, well, wait a minute. Ultimately, we're supposed to be going through this journey for the coming kingdom and for our role in it. So I added a 7th stage, and I've wrestled over time with what to call that. I called it the eternal beloved son, the reigning son. But now, after reading Blaine Eldridge's book, I've decided that I'm going to go with the Paradise King. That is where we are side by side with God in our glorified selves, and it's common. It's uncommonly taught, but within the circle that we're in, it's not uncommon for us to be invited to believe that in our 20s and 30s and 40s, we're actually being prepared by God for a position or a kingdom that he's going to give it to us in our 40s or 50s or 60s. And while that is true, it's only a fraction as true is to say that this life is all preparation for the stage of the Paradise King, where we are given that role, where who we are is fully known, fully appreciated, and we get to rule side by side with Jesus without fear, without anxiety, and without brokenness and such. So, so I call it 7 stages.
Again, super helpful. Now having a clear vision, or at least a framework to look for the clear vision of what the intent is. What is the design? And then how do we walk with God on a journey, stage by stage, to become that man that can eternally then, cross into eternity to become that Paradise King, lower K, under Jesus, in union with him, but also to raise our boys through that. And so shifting now gears and specifically thinking about our sons, and for the audience of this podcast, we mostly have kids that are in the beloved son stage or the adventurer, maybe even warrior stage. Mm-hmm. I have seen it in my 2 boys, and I am walking still with one of them, but so all this is 13. He's switching more into the adventurer stage super fast, without ceasing to be the beloved son, obviously. And then my little 7-year-old, who is he's just looking up to receive that love and that affection from his dad. What are the needs of the boys? I see in my boys, with their eyes, with their questions, the need for love, which you called out, that gaze, to look at me and to almost see themselves, the reflection in my eyes, and know that I love them unconditionally, that I delight in them, that I want to be with them, that I love what they love, that I want to spend time with them, that I care about the things they care about. That profound need to receive love from their father, with words and with actions. And so 2 things on that that God is drawing my heart to. One, as I see my sons and their need for that, it is almost like looking myself in a mirror and realizing how much I need that. And so, thoughts in your experience, in your walk, how do you engage with God to receive that on a daily basis at your age as a beloved son? And in your journey of raising Bear, when he was in the stage of the beloved son, any thoughts on how, as fathers, we can answer those questions to our boys well?
Yes. There was a moment when Bear was 12 and I was thinking I had to create a program for him, because I'd read books, and when you read a book about raising your son, it looks all buttoned up. It looks so clean. It looks so neat. And what I needed personally was permission to be messy. Mm-hmm. I needed to know that I'm trying to articulate this. What I felt was the pressure to do an event or a couple of events that were well planned, well orchestrated, and then say done. Mm. And I have actually seen men do that. And I have seen some of those men, some of those sons, not all of them, if that's what the journey looks like, and there's not a whole lot more to it in terms of an intimate ongoing conversation between father and son about the vision of authentic masculinity and how we get there, it does harm to the father and the son.
Mm-hmm.
If there's not that conversation, which is the foundation for any ceremony type of stuff. Mm. So when my son was 12 years old and I realized I have no idea how to do this, it was a relief for God to say to me, you know what, give yourself a decade to unpack this and figure it out, and give him a decade. One of the things that you have done is you have put pressure on him, which is a reflection of the pressure that you have felt on you. Mm-hmm. So how would this feel, Jay? Just let go of the pressure of all of it and just have the conversation and say, let's figure it out together. And I gave my son the one thing, the token that I gave my son on that trip. I had the foreknowledge to get just a cheap wooden sword off of Amazon. It was one of those Japanese, practice swords, and it had a sheath on it, and I had a wood burner, and so I burned a scripture, and I burned something on it for him, and I presented that to him on the very last night. And I said to him, well, one of the things I asked him was, would you do me the honor of sharing what the effect of my life has been on you? Now, if I had done that on night one, he would not have felt safe with that. For a week and a half, we did alpine slides and zip lines, and we just played and played and played and played with no teaching whatsoever, because I had to earn the right to be heard. Like, he needed to go all the way back to stage one because I had compromised and pushed him too quickly into stage two and even into stage three. So God said, you need to give him permission to just play and bathe and splash in that river of beloved son for 2 weeks. And you need that as much as him. Yeah. And I'll tell you what to say and when to say it. And it wasn't until the very last night. Every day I was just caught off guard. God just kept saying, nope, 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 not yet. And then the very last night we're in this hotel room, he says, okay, now speak from the heart. Repent. Tell him the ways that you recognize you've hurt him. Ask him to tell you your impact on him. And then share with him the stages of the masculine journey and where you see your journey has been compromised and where I'm inviting you into it, right? So I was telling him those stages of the masculine journey where I felt like I was like, Bear, like, our Father is inviting me all the way back to this stage right here, and he's using you as the most powerful man in my life to teach me the most life-giving message I could ever learn. Thank you for being a participant in my story. Not only a participant, the most important participant in my story right now. I said, it's going to take me 10 years probably minimum to figure this out. And I have compromised your ability to be the beloved son and to rest in that. And I'm sorry. Would you forgive me for taking your innocence and your childhood away? Would you please forgive me for not making a safe world for you to try things that are hard and fail? Because he had told me, I'm just afraid of disappointing you. And in so many ways that I was 100% culpable for that. And so I said, okay, next 10 years, we're going to create an environment in our home where I'm going to celebrate you taking risks. We're going to celebrate failures. We're going to learn together. I'm going to take risks as well. And that's when I pulled out the practice sword. I said, buddy, someday I'm going to give you a real sword when God says that it's the time. But right now I'm giving you this practice sword. And I just want you to play and have fun for the next 10 years. And the whole posture and countenance of his heart and his identity changed. I could actually see it on him. He was a brilliantly joyful kid by comparison after that. And it was just the beginning of, a lot of conversations that we began practicing being sons in that dojo type of way, Um, is that helpful?
It is very helpful. It is very risky. What would it look like then to have the balls, to be honest, to sit down with my son and for me and for the men listening today and ask them, what is the effect that I've had on you as a dad? As a means, or what is the equivalent question that they actually can connect with that speaks those words, or that the spirit of those words, to see how have I answered the core questions of his masculine heart at his age. Does he feel like the beloved son, that he is loved and appreciated and seen and safe because of who he is, and because he lives in an atmosphere that we have created as fathers so that they can feel like that? Or have we compromised that? And are we willing to actually ask that question, so that based on his honest answer, and obviously earning the trust and creating a safe space so that they can answer the question openly, and then owning it and asking for forgiveness for the parts where we have failed, instead of minimizing, or no, you misunderstand, or that's not was not my intention, or I never, no, but to own it, to validate their feeling, to validate the place where they are, and then to bring that before God and say, Father me. Would you guide me so that the atmosphere that I create from this point on is a reflection of the atmosphere that you would create for me as a son, or that you want to create for my son as your son? And begin step by step walking with God in creating that space. It is really, really helpful. About 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I believe, I dared to ask that question to Mateo when he was very little. He was 3 at the time. He wouldn't have had the language, or even to even understand the question. So my question was, what do you like to do with that the most? And what do you like about? And then we had the question of how grumpy I am from 1 to 10. So what's my grumpimeter marking? And that he would risk and say it's been like 7, 8, when right. And that was typically when I was flustered or frustrated about something in life. I would bring that home in my brokenness, and I still do, obviously, much less than before, thank God. And so we had those two things. What are the things that you're enjoying most about that? And at first, I remember him saying, I love it when on Sundays we watch TV. And like, what does that mean for me, right? And so, oh yeah, awesome. And then taking that feedback and bringing that before God, that's what he likes the most. How come? And having that answer be the clear reflection of who I was being as a father. I was giving the crumbs of the table to my son because I was preoccupied with work and ministry and fighting for others and a bunch of other things that were answering my questions of identity and validation of my own soul. And I was bringing my home the crumbs from the table. And so having the balls to ask those serious questions to our children, in my case, it just gave me a very poignant and a very harsh reality check in love that I took to God. Father, that is not the father that I want to be. And with that, being confronted with things that I could hear, that I could buy into, such as, well, I need to work hard to provide for my family and offer him this and this and this and that. And there's obviously truth to a part of that. But my 3-year-old son didn't want the whatever vacation to the place in the other side of the world. He didn't want the super expensive toy. He wanted that. And he would receive, or he would grab whatever I gave him, even if that was simply Sunday afternoon after 3 services at church of, fighting for others and walking with Jesus for the kingdom, quote unquote. I would come back home and I was completely fried, and all I could do was turn the TV on and allow my son to rest on my chest and veg, half asleep, half being there with him. And so it was a big shift. So thank you for bringing up the important category of asking them, and being able to wrestle with that reality, because that was a pivotal point for me to ask the questions. Why is it that I'm bringing the crumbs from the table to my kids instead of giving them my best and my most? And as those questions began to be answered, Jesus took me through a very long journey of restoration, deep restoration and transformation, which has brought quite a bit of change, right? To be home for my kids for dinner every night, most nights, if not every night, to get on my knees and play with them, and whether it's Lego or whatever they're into at the moment, and wrestle with them and cuddle with them and tickle them and ask them, what do you want to do? And all of that was began to open up from being willing to ask that question and then bringing that question to God, like you suggested, as a son, asking Him to father me in the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Jay, then we begin to shift into the adventurer, and they're beginning to, that you see the winds, the sails are asking for wind. Share more about that. I'm entering into that stage, and suddenly I find myself with Legos and cuddling and wrestling, and the things that work no longer do. And I'm entering into a completely different season where my son wants to be tested and wants to be initiated and wants to compete and become the best. And it's different. I see the adventurer heart taking over the beloved son, obviously never to replace it, but very strongly moving towards the adventurer. What was that between you and Bear? That was the moment where God intervened, right? That 12-year-old stage when things shifted,
Mm-hmm.
and you began to walk with God as a son, fathering him and in parallel paths with Bear. What would you speak? What would you say to me as a father? My son is 13 now, and he's beginning to ask those questions, and I'm teaching him to shave, and he's wearing my shoes and speaking with my, this dark voice that I don't know where it came from, because mine is more high pitch. Yeah, give me some coaching. What would you say to Jay when Bear was 13 or turning 13? What would you say to me? What would you say to men who are in my shoes?
What a great question. And again, the answer is surprisingly simple and life-giving. And it's a step into the lighter and easier yoke that Jesus talks about. A lot of what I was operating out of was the heavy burden. Come to me, all you who are, heavy burdened. And I thought that it's up to me to make this happen. But to begin to explain to my son, oh, this is what's going to happen, and you get to cooperate with this. You get to cooperate with God, literally beginning to open up almost like cells inside your body and releasing testosterone into your body. And that testosterone is going to reveal to your mind and to your heart that it's time you try new things. And it's time you grow. It's time you learn that there's way more to you than you know. And it's time for you to discover that there are things that you don't need me to do for you anymore. So, son, I'm not the only person that God's going to use to bring you to maturity. God's going to bring you a bunch of people, and to begin helping him see that men with skill sets are being placed in his life to teach him skills and to challenge him and to invite him in ways that I never could. He had a man that taught cybersecurity at school, and he absolutely loved it. So I went to the cybersecurity teacher, and I invited that man into my son's fathering story. I just gave him a quick vision of what I was telling my son. And he was like, oh, wow, amazing. Yes, okay. I get to play the role of a father in my son, in Bear's life. So I would go around Bear without Bear knowing about it, talking to his teachers, talking to his coaches, talking to his friends, fathers. And I would just say, here's what's up. Whenever you can, speak words of life and invite my son to do things that he may be uncomfortable doing, which at times was just trying foods that he'd never tried before. He was trying out for the chess team. It was he was taking risks. A lot of it was yard work. We've got a very small yard here, so it actually was hard for me to identify things around here to invite him into. And I think, like I mentioned before, when I first started having Bear mow the yard, it would take him 6 hours and like 15 water breaks, and he'd have to change his music over and over again. And you just thought, after a year of this, is he ever going to learn? And today, he can do it like that. Today, he comes home from college, he takes the trash out all by himself. All these things that I had to force him to do in the context of a vision of being a man that others could trust with very difficult things. You always have to start with the small things. Again, it's just painting a picture as he moves out of the beloved son stage into the adventure stage. You're going to have to learn to do difficult things, and you're going to love who you are in doing difficult things. Another thing that was a category that our buddy Morgan was really helpful with was articulating to my son the difference between a specialist and a generalist. Right around the age of 10, 11, 12 years old, the distinction, the bodies begin to change in all the boys. And you begin seeing their unique giftedness, their personalities. The athletes are clearly the athletes. The nerds are clearly the nerds. And so kids begin to quickly, out of need and to hide themselves, they'll find the thing that they're good at most easily, and then they'll hide themselves behind that veneer, just like men do. And my son, it was fantasy books. It was his bearded dragon, and it was computers. And if you asked him to do anything outside of that, he'd say, oh, that's not me. That's not me. And to be able to sit with him, and like I began scratching my head going, how do I give my son a picture of what a well-rounded man is? And then to be able to look at guys like Aragorn. And then it was to go onto Netflix and look up the old TV show MacGyver. If you're not familiar with MacGyver can build a bomb out of a stick of gum and baling wire. And to sit down and to celebrate kind of this uber masculine guy who had enough familiarity with enough different things that he was able to be present and meet the need, whatever it was, in a given situation. And I said, that's what you're called to. And if you just stick with these things that you're good at, you're always going to be very aware of those unfathered, uninitiated, unprepared places. So why don't we try something else? Why don't we try things that neither of us are good at? And he was a hard sell on that. Until in my praying, Father, father me, how do I do this? I came across the concept of a get home bag, which was new to me. And a get home bag is pretty awesome. I mean, if you really invest in one of these things, you could sink $500 into one of these really easily. Well, okay, it's a bushcraft knife. It's 4 different ways to make a flame and a fire. It's a saw that you could go out in the woods and you could cut limbs. It's possibly an axe. It's food. It's the ability. It's the components to be able to cook food. We began researching a get home bag, and we would go and we would purchase all these things, and then we would play with them in the backyard, and we would watch videos on how to do bushcraft. And where he was hiding at first in his books and he was hiding in his computers, God was creatively drawing out out the real him by using pictures like Aragorn and MacGyver, and now this cool, inviting get home bag with all these cool gadgets in it was inviting him to grow up and try things that were uncomfortable. And I would say the get home bag was probably the most brilliant idea in the world, because now my son loves woodworking. It really changed his personality. And I would say that took place over about a 2-year period. But that was something fun that Bear and I got to do together. And again, I can't take credit for that idea. That was just all God. And we got to do the research and choose the components inside the get home bag. Gosh, there's just so many things. I mean, at one point, Bear's wall had pictures all over it of him painting the fence and having a camping trip with his buddies and just doing all these things. And I would celebrate it. And I would say, son, this is a noteworthy turning point in your story where you actually became somebody new after you did this on this day. Congratulations. You're no longer the little boy that you were. You now have something in you that you did not have before. And then my son began to have a vision of a wall that was filled with all of these turning point moments that collectively are painting a picture of a strong, capable, wise, tough man who had something to offer to the world and who was being trained intentionally to be a good king.
I love the description, Jay, because in that almost tapestry created with all those photos is the beginnings of the reflection of that man that you started at the beginning, giving him a vision of what could be. Photo by photo, that vision it's becoming a reality. I wonder if there is anything that has been left unsaid, anything that either you would have wanted to come back to younger Jay when he was beginning this journey with his son, or speak to the men in the WILDSONS community that you'd like to say today? As I'm fathering my sons, as I have this longing, this desire to raise my boys to become real men of God, what would you like to close today with?
Yeah, I feel the need to share a very disruptive truth. And I know it's disruptive because it disrupted me a ton. And that's this: you can't take somebody where you've never been. That weekend in Colorado, when God invited me to be the beloved son, just an hour and a half prior to that moment, God set the stage for me to receive that exact invitation. John was teaching a session on the stages of the masculine journey. I think his book had just come out, and so he was kind of practicing the material in the very last session. And so he went through those categories, beloved son and adventurer and warrior, and he went through them. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I love this stage. I love this stage. I love this stage. And then he said something that I quickly dismissed. And he said, and God loves you so much as your heavenly Father that he will take you back to the places in your story where you missed being well fathered and well initiated. Or he'll strengthen. I don't want to throw fathers under the bus. No father's perfect, but he goes back to the uninitiated places and he brings you what you were missing. And I remember thinking, well, sucks. He even said some guys have to go all the way back to the beloved son stage. And I remember thinking to myself in the session, sucks to be that guy that has to go all the way back to the beginning. I wasn't even aware. I was so self-unaware that an hour and a half later, out in the woods, he brought me to weeping by inviting me back to be the beloved son. That's what we all need. The beloved son's not just a cute phrase that's been thrown around. I really appreciate that with overuse, words lose their meaning. But I'm still wrestling to believe that the word beloved has a rightful place in front of my name when God speaks it. My beloved son, Jay. I'm still discovering that, and it's never too late. I'm here to tell you the same thing based on my own experience, that you can't go forward without going backward. And many of us are afraid of that. But God will do it. And it hinges upon those three humble words: Father, father me. And it was George MacDonald, I believe, who said, the hardest, gladdest thing in the world is to cry, Abba, from a full heart. It's the hardest because it's the most humbling, and it's the gladdest because the little boy inside us, which never ever goes away, wants more than anything to know that no matter where we are in our stage of life, that we have a loving Father who's going to catch us, who's always going to provide, who's always going to protect, and always sees the plan for us, and it's not up to us. Without the revelation of being beloved sons, we're angry and under pressure all the days of our life, and that's the yoke. That's the exchange of the heavy yoke for the light and easy yoke, and it goes hand in hand with beloved sonship.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the WILDSONS podcast, and if you did, I want to invite you to subscribe to it and to share it with anyone in your world that you think could benefit from it, and also to visit us at wildsons.com to learn more about our online workshops and our weekend retreats and events, and to subscribe to WILDSONS Weekly, our free newsletter for those who want to become the men, the husbands, the fathers, the leaders God created them to be. See you next time.